Hi, welcome to Virtually Sunday. My name's Tony Pickler, and this is a production of Whatsoever You Do Incorporated in Green Bay, Wisconsin. This past week, I was on vacation in Arizona, and my wife and I and a couple of friends went to Sedona, which is a beautiful community that has these iron-colored rock formations surrounding this community in Arizona. And it's so, so beautiful. It's a very artistic community, but it is also one that has such beauty in terms of nature. So on Sunday afternoon, we took a 1-hour bus trip, and I was fascinated to learn how the rocks were formed and why they were formed and when they were formed and all of that. But what really intrigued me about the trip was the bus driver. Our bus driver had about a 20-year experience as a truck driver. And before that, he was in communications at the White House working for President Reagan and President Carter. He had invented some things, and he was a great storyteller. And so as he was giving us this tour, he would tell us some stories, and then he would point out some formations, and then he would tell us some history, and then he'd tell us some science. And at one point he stopped and he said, "Now look at that rock formation up there on the hill." And we looked up and he said, "Do you see 3 fingers in that rock formation?" And of course we did. We all did. Everybody on the bus agreed that yes, we all saw 3 fingers in this rock formation. He says, "Now hold that image. I'm going to tell you another story as we drive on, but then we're going to take this from a little different perspective." So he tells us this other story. We go down the road about 5 minutes, and he says, "Okay, now look back and look at that same rock formation. What do you see?" Well, we all saw one pillar, look like a chimney. And he said, "That's exactly right. It's called Chimney Rock. And it is from this side, one pillar. From another side, it looks like 3 fingers. The rock hasn't changed. We've changed. We changed our perspective. We changed where we were situated. We changed where we were located. It's us who needed to change to see something different in that rock formation." This guy was a philosopher. He was also an incredibly gifted man. But I learned so much on that bus trip, not necessarily all about rock formations, but about life and about faith. I bring that story to you because it really reminds me of this Sunday's readings, this 4th Sunday of Lent, the Sunday where we kind of go over the edge, we go over the midpoint, and we are on the home stretch towards Easter. The first reading this Sunday is from the book of 1 Samuel, and it's a famous story of the choosing of David as the king for Israel. And it's a great story where Samuel is instructed by God to go to Bethlehem to search out this guy named Jesse. And then out of Jesse's son, God will choose the next king. So Samuel does as instructed, and he gets to this first person, and he's a big, strapping young guy. And he thinks, well, this must be the next king. But God doesn't choose that guy. And then they go through 7 sons. And one son after another, big, strapping, strong young men who you would think would be the image of a king. God doesn't choose any of them. So Samuel's perplexed because there are no other sons apparently for him to check out. So God says to Samuel, "Go tell Jesse to get his final son, his youngest son." And so he does. So this young David, scrawny little guy, comes and appears before Samuel. And God whispers to Samuel, "That is the anointed one. That is the chosen one to be the king." And so Samuel took oil and anointed this young David as the next king of Israel. He had to change his perspective. His perspective was that the next king would be this great, strong man who would lead the kingdom. That wasn't it at all. He had to change his perspective and change the way he was thinking about kingship. So then we move on into the gospel, and this week it's the gospel according to St. John. And it's probably one of my favorite stories in Scripture, arguably in my top 5. And it's a story of the blind man. And essentially the story goes like this. The blind man is brought to Jesus to be healed, to be cured of his blindness. But the religious leaders are wondering, why is this man blind? Was it because he had committed some sin? Or had his parents committed some sin to cause him to be blind? That was their perspective. That's the way they viewed life at that time. Somebody had to have sinned in order for a person to be blind. Well, Jesus didn't see life that way. He came at it from a different perspective. And so this man's brought to him to be healed of his blindness. Jesus takes some mud, puts it on his eyes, and he eventually is able to see. The religious leaders don't believe it. They don't believe that this man, Jesus, has this power to heal a blind man. What I love is the questioning of the religious leaders to Jesus, but also the religious leaders to the blind man. They ultimately ask the blind man, look, how is it that before you were blind and now you can see? And the blind man says, look, this is all I know. This is all I know. Is before I was blind, this man came into my life and now I see. And they didn't believe him. And so all he could do is repeat it, hoping that their perspective would be changed. I was blind. That's all I know. I was blind. But today, because of this man, who now I believe to be the Messiah, I can see. His perspective has changed. The leaders needed to change their perspective, but they were finding it hard to do. What's that say about us in our life now, 2,000 years later? What is it in our lives that needs a change of perspective? The rock isn't going to change. The rock is still what the rock is. Maybe we need to change. Maybe it's a relationship that's just not working out. And if we change our perspective of who that person is that we're trying to relate to, maybe we'll change enough for the relationship to change and to grow and to get better. What is it that needs to change in our lives? What perspective change do we need in our lives? That's a challenge that's going to challenge me this week, and hopefully it'll challenge you as well. The rocks don't change. It's us who need to move to create a new view of life, a new perspective. Have a great week, everyone.